Welcome to the deep dive. We're plunging into North Africa today, a region that, wow, it's seen such a sweep of history.
It really has. For millennia, it's been this incredible crossroads, a melting pot, a link between continents.
But also, let's face it, a stage for some pretty persistent conflicts and deep-seated rivalries.
Definitely. You have this mix of ethnic, religious, political factors, and then, of course, the huge impact of colonial legacies shaping the landscape. It's complex.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to try and understand the key historical and, well, the modern rivalries and conflicts between North African countries based on the overview text we've analyzed.
Exactly. We want to give you a condensed but hopefully really insightful look. You might see some surprising connections maybe, and the underlying causes that are still driving things today.
Okay, let's get into it. Going way back, maybe before we even think about the modern borders, our source starts pre-colonial. What were the big powers then?
Yeah, you're looking at the ancient heavyweights, Egypt, obviously, with its incredible history.
Pharaohs and all that.
Right. And then Carthage, the Phoenician trading powerhouse.
Hmm.
Rome's big rival for a long time.
Okay.
And scattered across the Maghreb interior, you had various Berber kingdoms and tribal groups. They weren't just sitting there either. They interacted, traded, fought.
Right, and those interactions often became conflicts. The text mentions things like territory, trade routes, resources, the usual drivers, I suppose.
Pretty much. Territory meant power, controlling trade meant wealth, and resources, especially water in that part of the world, well, that was survival. Competition was almost inevitable.
And this leads us to something huge, that Carthage versus Rome rivalry. The text highlights the Punic Wars. This wasn't minor, was it?
Oh, not at all. Monumental. A clash of civilizations, really. It ended, as you know, with Carthage being completely destroyed.
Mind-boggling scale, and the impact. Lasting, I imagine.
Absolutely fundamental. Wiping Carthage off the map created this massive power vacuum and just changed North Africa's direction for centuries. And even before that massive showdown, you see hints of earlier tensions, like clashes between Egyptian pharaohs and Berber tribes.
Over what, mainly?
Mostly about controlling the desert regions, the oases, the trade networks running through them. So this pattern of competition, it's there from very early on.
Okay, fast forward a few centuries, a massive change comes with Islam, starting in the 7th century. How did that reshape things, the rivalries?
Well, integrating North Africa into the Islamic world was transformative naturally. It brought a kind of unifying religious and cultural layer,
Okay.
but it also introduced new conflict dynamics. Initially, you had significant fighting between the Arab conquerors and the local Berber populations.
Right, the text mentions Arab-Berber conflicts, so resistance.
Oh, definitely. Fierce resistance in many areas. It wasn't a smooth takeover everywhere. While most Berbers did eventually adopt Islam, they didn't always accept Arab political dominance easily.
So that led to more instability.
Yeah, periods of unrest, Berber groups setting up their own states, sometimes even powerful Berber dynasties rising up and challenging Arab rule.
Speaking of dynasties, the source points to a big one. The Fatimids versus the Almoravids. Sounds significant.
It was crucial. You had the Fatimids, a Shiite caliphate looking to dominate North Africa, versus the Almoravids, who were a powerful Sunni Berber empire in the west.
So different branches of Islam.
Exactly. They fought hard over key areas, Egypt, Tunisia, parts of Morocco. And that religious dimension, Shiite versus Sunni, added another layer of intensity to their fight for control.
Okay, so we've got ancient empires, Islam spreading. Then the Ottoman Empire arrives on the scene, 16th century onwards, another layer.
Another layer, yes. The Ottomans established control over large parts of North Africa, but it was often a balancing act
How so?
between direct Ottoman rule and giving quite a bit of autonomy to local rulers, like the Deys in Algiers or the Pashas in Tunis.
And that created its own problems.
It did. You had rivalries not just with the Ottomans, but between these local Ottoman-backed rulers themselves.
The text mentions Algiers and Tunis specifically. What were they fighting over?
Mostly control of trade routes, Mediterranean, Saharan, very lucrative, and just general regional clout,
Yeah.
Trying to expand their influence within the broader Ottoman system. Little power games within the big empire.
Right. And then the big shift. European colonialism in 19th and 20th centuries. France, Italy, Spain carving things up. This must have drastically changed the game.
Oh, completely. A watershed moment. Colonial powers redrew maps, often ignoring who actually lived where, disrupted old trade patterns for their own benefit.
And sometimes stirred up trouble deliberately.
Sometimes, yes. Exacerbating ethnic or social divisions could be a tool to maintain control. That colonial legacy, it casts a really long shadow, even today.
The source zooms in on a few key colonial conflicts. The French-Algerian War, 1954-1962, it sounds incredibly brutal and impactful.
It was exceptionally long and bloody. It left deep, deep scars,
Hmm.
not just between Algeria and France, but it affected Algeria's relations with other former French colonies too.
Tough.
Well, the Algerian struggle became this potent symbol of anti-colonialism. It forged a very strong Algerian national identity, one deeply suspicious of any outside interference. That still shapes their foreign policy.
Interesting. Then there's Italy and Libya that caused friction with Egypt.
Yes, Egypt had long-standing ties to Libya, historical, cultural, economic. Italy's ambitions, especially under Mussolini.
The whole revive Rome idea.
Exactly. That was seen by Egypt as a direct threat to its own interests and position in the region. It definitely planted seeds of mistrust.
And Spain and Morocco. The Rif Mountains, the Rif War?
Right, the Rif War was a major early challenge to European colonialism, led by Abdelkrim. It showed fierce local resistance.
And left lasting issues.
It did, especially over those territories Spain held on to even after Morocco became independent. The handover process for places like Ceuta and Melilla remains a point of contention.
Okay, so that brings us past colonialism, mid-20th century, independence. You'd hope for cooperation, but the text says rivalries. Continued. Evolved.
They definitely continued. Independence didn't just wipe the slate clean. You still had the colonial borders, often dividing groups or lumping rivals together, and old historical baggage.
Like Morocco and Algeria, the source really highlights that one.
It's a prime example. A major post-colonial rivalry with roots going way back.
The Sand War in '63 over borders, places like Tindouf, seems like a classic territorial dispute carrying over.
Precisely. A direct military clash over where the borders should be. They got a ceasefire, but it didn't solve the core issue. Those disputed areas have been a source of tension ever since.
But the really big flashpoint between them, the source stresses, is Western Sahara. Why is that such a huge deal for Morocco-Algeria relations?
Well, when Spain pulled out in the mid-70s, Morocco basically moved in, claiming historical ties. Mauritania also claimed parts initially.
In Algeria.
Algeria strongly backed and continues to back the Polisario Front, the Sahrawi independence movement.
So it's become ideological, a proxy thing.
Very much so. Algeria sees Morocco's control as expansionism. Morocco sees Western Sahara as fundamentally Moroccan territory. Algeria's support for Polisario political material is probably the single biggest obstacle to better relations. It leads to constant diplomatic friction, border closures, deep mistrust.
Okay, let's shift eastwards. Libya. Since Gaddafi's fall in 2011, the text talks about civil wars, fragmentation, a proxy battleground.
That's a good way to put it. The power vacuum after Gaddafi led to the country splitting into rival factions, militias.
And outside powers getting involved.
Heavily. You have Egypt backing one side, General Haftar's LNA, then Turkey strongly supporting the government in Tripoli, the GNU.
So Libya's internal fight reflects bigger regional rivalries, like Egypt versus Turkey.
Exactly. It's playing out in Libya with implications for the whole Eastern Mediterranean.
And Tunisia, stuck in the middle there, trying to stay neutral.
It's a very delicate position for them. Geographically close to both Libya and Algeria, two big neighbors, Tunisia is mainly focused on its own internal challenges after its 2011 revolution.
Which kicked off the Arab Spring, of course. But its own transition has been rocky, the text notes.
Very much so. Fragile democratic progress, economic difficulties. Neutrality in the Libya conflict is probably its only viable option.
Okay, another major tension point mentioned is further south. Egypt and Sudan over the Nile. And now Ethiopia's dam, water is fundamental.
Absolutely critical. The Nile is everything for Egypt, and largely for Sudan, too. Egypt sees any potential reduction in its historical water share as an existential threat.
And Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam, the GERD.
That's massively heightened tensions. It's on the Blue Nile, which supplies most of the Nile's water. Egypt fears it will drastically cut their supply.
What about Sudan's position?
It's been a bit more complicated, sometimes aligning with Egypt, sometimes seeing potential benefits from the dam, like cheaper electricity or flood control. But the potential impact on their water supply makes them a key player in this very, very sensitive dispute.
Beyond these state versus state issues, the text mentions broader tensions, like secular versus Islamist movements, and economic competition.
Yes, that political dimension is huge across North Africa. Think about the Muslim Brotherhood, its rise and suppression in places like Egypt, Tunisia, Libya. That created deep internal splits, but also affected regional relations as countries lined up with different factions.
And the economy, oil and gas.
Economic competition, especially over energy resources, definitely adds another layer. Countries like Egypt, Algeria, Libya vying for investment, market access, regional influence. It can fuel indirect conflict or tension.
And finally, the source points to current ongoing issues,
Yeah.
economic hardship, terrorism. How do these connect to the rivalries?
Well, severe economic problems, like high unemployment, breed instability. We saw that fuel the Arab Spring protests in 2011, that internal instability can easily spill over or be exploited by regional rivals.
In terrorism, groups like AQM or ISIS.
They add another layer of complexity. Countries need to cooperate to fight them, but the existing rivalries and mistrust often get in the way of effective joint action. It complicates everything.
Okay, so if we try to recap the main fault lines, it's Morocco-Algeria, dominated by Western Sahara.
Yes.
Egypt, heavily involved in Libya, often opposing Turkey's influence there.
Right. Proxy dynamics,
Tunisia trying to balance between its neighbors.
the neutral player, navigating carefully.
And then the huge issue of Nile water rights, pulling in Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia.
A critical resource conflict with potentially massive consequences.
Wow. It really is a complex web, isn't it?
It is. And as we've seen, these conflicts aren't really separate boxes. They're tangled together, with deep historical roots still influencing today's geopolitics. Colonial legacies, ethnic issues, resources, religion, external meddling, it's all in the mix.
So thinking ahead, considering this long, complicated history, what are the prospects for maybe greater stability or cooperation in North Africa? It feels like a tough question.
It's incredibly tough. There are potential pathways, economic integration perhaps, but the obstacles are immense.
And what external factors might be key? Global power shifts, climate change impacting resources like water even more.
All of those could play huge roles, absolutely.
Hmm.
It really leaves you thinking about how much the past shapes the present and the huge challenges facing this vital region.
A lot to consider indeed. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.